The trunk of my stepfather's car smelled like motor oil and fast food wrappers. I remember that because I spent the last 20 minutes of that drive staring at the ceiling of the back seat, counting the tiny fabric loops in the upholstery, trying not to cry. I was 9 years old. We had stopped at a Walmart off I-77 somewhere outside of Charlotte. My mother told me she needed to use the restroom and that I should wait by the cart return. She handed me a half-empty bottle of Sprite and said she'd be right back. She was not right back. I stood there for a long time. Long enough that the Sprite got warm. Long enough that a woman with a cart full of groceries asked me twice if I was okay, and I said yes both times because I didn't know how to say what I actually knew, which was that the silver sedan was gone from the parking lot and it had been gone for a while. The woman's name was Kathleen. She worked at the customer service desk inside, and she called the police, and the police called child services, and child services called my grandmother's sister, who drove 2 hours from Greensboro to pick me up. I fell asleep in the back seat of her car before we even got on the highway. When I woke up, I was in a bedroom with yellow curtains and a quilt that smelled like cedar, and someone had taken off my shoes and put a glass of water on the nightstand. That was how I came to live with my great-aunt, Corrine. She never made me feel like a burden. That is the thing I want to say first, before anything else, because it matters. She had her own life. She was 61. She volunteered at her church. She had a garden she cared about and a cat named Biscuit who hated everyone except her. And none of that had included raising a child. But she did it anyway. She enrolled me in school, took me to the dentist, showed up to every parent-teacher conference in shoes that matched her bag, like she was dressing for something important. Because she thought I was something important. I don't know how to explain what that does to a kid. I don't know if I have the words even now. I grew up in Greensboro. I went to college on a partial scholarship and waited tables 3 nights a week to cover the rest. I graduated with a degree in accounting, passed my CPA exam on the first try, and got a job at a mid-sized firm downtown that handled small business taxes and estate planning. I was 26 when I made senior associate, 28 when I made manager. By the time I was 31, I had a 1-bedroom apartment in a building with a doorman named Gerald, who remembered how I took my coffee and always had the elevator held when he saw me coming from the parking garage. My life was quiet in the way I had worked very hard to make it quiet. Organized, predictable, safe. I had not spoken to my mother in 22 years. I had not spoken to my stepfather at all, ever, by choice. I thought about them sometimes, not with longing, more the way you think about a weather event that happened a long time ago. Something that altered the landscape permanently. Something you had simply learned to navigate around. I knew they had eventually moved to the Raleigh area. I knew this because my great-aunt had mentioned it once, years before she passed, in the tone that suggested she was telling me so I would know to be careful, not so I would reach out. Corrine died when I was 27. She left me her house, her cat's memory, and the cedar-smelling quilt, which I still have folded at the foot of my bed. I inherited nothing else from anyone. I built everything I had with my own hands and my own time, and I want you to understand that before I tell you what happened next, because the next part is about people who understood none of that. It was a Tuesday in March when the first knock came. I had just gotten home from work. I was still in my coat. I'd set my bag down on the kitchen counter and was about to make tea when I heard it. 3 slow knocks. Deliberate, the kind that aren't casual. I looked through the peephole. I did not recognize the woman at first. She was in her early 60s, thinner than I remembered, wearing a fleece jacket and holding her purse in front of her with both hands. But then she tilted her head at a particular angle and something in my chest went cold, because I recognized that gesture. I had been trying to forget that gesture for 22 years. My mother. I stood very still with my hand on the door handle and I did not breathe. She knocked again. Ivy? Ivy, I know you're in there. Your car is in the garage. She paused. I just want to talk. Please? I didn't answer. She knocked one more time, waited, and then I heard her footsteps moving down the hall. I stood in my coat in my kitchen for a long time after that. I didn't make the tea. I sat down on the floor next to the counter, which I have never told anyone, and I stayed there until my knees started to hurt. The next morning, I called my attorney. Her name is Joelle, and she has been my attorney since I bought my apartment. She is precise and unsentimental in all the best ways. And the first thing she said when I explained the situation was, "Do not open that door, do not acknowledge contact, and document everything." I documented everything. The second visit was 6 days later. This time both of them were there. My mother and my stepfather. He looked older, heavier, with the kind of tired that settles into a person's face after years of bad decisions. They knocked for longer this time. My stepfather put his hand on the door frame like he owned the place. My mother said things like, "We've changed, and we just need a few minutes, and you don't understand the situation we're in." That last part told me everything I needed to know. I did not open the door. I pulled out my phone and I filmed them through the peephole camera app Gerald had helped me set up the week before, because Gerald, bless him, had heard the story and had immediately said, "You need documentation." I sent the footage to Joelle. She sent it to the building's management. My building has a no trespass policy, and by that afternoon, both of them had been formally notified in writing that they were not permitted on the property. My stepfather called my office 3 days after that. I don't know how he got the number. I found out later it was publicly listed on the firm's website, which I had never thought to worry about, because I had spent 22 years not being someone that anyone was looking for. The receptionist, a young woman named, well, she was very kind about it. She told him I wasn't available and asked if he wanted to leave a message. He left a message. She wrote it down exactly as he said it, because she later told me something felt off about the call. The message said, "We are not asking for much. We know you're doing well. We are your parents and we need help. Please call back." I read that message standing at my desk and I felt something that wasn't quite anger. It was colder than anger. It was clarity. I took the message to Joelle. She drafted a formal cease and desist letter, citing harassment, trespassing, and unauthorized contact at my place of work. The letter was sent certified mail to the last known address we could find, a rental in a suburb south of Raleigh. They called again the following week, this time to my cell phone. I do not know how they got my cell number. I have since changed it. But before I changed it, I answered. I answered because Joelle said it might be useful to have a recorded conversation, and because I had spent 22 years not saying anything, and I thought I deserved to say one thing. My stepfather spoke first. He said they were in a difficult situation financially. He said they had some medical expenses. He was vague about what kind, and that they were behind on rent. He said they had tried to reach me through the building because they didn't want to cause problems. They just needed some help getting back on their feet. He used the phrase, "family is family," twice. I let him finish. Then I said, "I have retained an attorney. This conversation is being recorded. Any further contact from either of you will result in legal action. I have nothing else to say." And I hung up. My hands were shaking. I set the phone down on the kitchen table and I pressed both palms flat against the surface and I breathed. I was not sad. I want to be clear about that. What I felt was something closer to exhaustion. The particular exhaustion that comes from carrying something heavy for a very long time and finally being allowed to set it down. They did not stop. 2 weeks after the phone call, I received a handwritten letter. It had been forwarded through my old address, the apartment I'd had before this one, because apparently at some point in the years I hadn't been paying attention, someone had connected the two. The letter was written in my mother's handwriting, which I recognized even after all those years. It was 3 pages. It talked about regret. It talked about how they had made mistakes. It talked about medical bills and a car that needed repairs and a landlord who wasn't being reasonable. Buried on the second page was a specific number, $12,000. I put the letter in a manila folder and drove it to Joelle's office that afternoon. She looked at the number and then looked at me over her glasses. "They've escalated to a specific demand. That changes the legal category of what they're doing." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means we have stronger grounds," she said. "It means if they contact you again, We have a pattern. We have documentation. We have the trespassing record at your building. We have the workplace call. And now we have a written demand for money. That is not a family trying to reconcile. That is something else. She filed a report with local police in my jurisdiction. She also contacted the department in the Raleigh suburb where they were living. What happened next took about 6 weeks to unfold, and I will not pretend I was calm during those 6 weeks. I had a hard time sleeping. I had a hard time concentrating at work. There was one Thursday afternoon when I sat in my car in the parking garage for 40 minutes before I could make myself go upstairs, because every time I came home, I felt like I was bracing for something. Gerald noticed. He asked if I wanted him to let him know if he saw anyone he didn't recognize. I said yes. He said, "I've got you," and he meant it, and I have thought about that a lot since then. How many times in my life the people who showed up for me were not the people who were supposed to. The police made contact with my mother and stepfather. They were interviewed separately. Certain things came out in those interviews that I was not aware of. There had been other people they had approached for money in the years before they found me, and at least one of those situations had resulted in a prior complaint. That prior complaint, combined with the documented pattern of contact in my case, was enough to move things forward. They were both charged with criminal harassment and extortion. My stepfather's attorney tried to argue that reaching out to a family member about financial hardship was not extortion. The prosecutor's office disagreed. So did the judge. I did not attend the hearings. Joelle attended on my behalf. She called me after each one and told me what had happened in plain language, because she knows that's how I need information when I'm stressed. The sentence was not what you'd see in a movie. There was no dramatic moment. No one was led away in handcuffs while I watched from across the room. My stepfather received probation and a fine. My mother received probation and was required to complete a financial counseling program. Both were issued permanent no-contact orders. Both were formally notified that any future contact would result in immediate arrest. I found out the final outcome on a Wednesday afternoon. Joelle called me at 3:17 p.m. I remember the time because I had just gotten out of a client meeting and I was still holding my notebook. I sat down in the hallway outside the conference room and I listened to her explain it, and when she was done, I said, "Thank you." And then I just sat there for a minute. A colleague walked by and asked if I was okay. I said I was. She looked at me for a second like she wasn't sure, and then she nodded and kept walking. I appreciated that she didn't push. That weekend, I drove to Greensboro. I'm not sure what made me do it. I hadn't planned to. I just found myself on the highway heading west, and I knew where I was going before I fully decided to go there. I drove to the street where Corrine had lived, where I had lived for the better part of a decade. The house had been sold after she passed, and the new owners had painted the shutters a different color, and the garden was different, and it was all different. But the structure was the same. The bones of it were the same. I parked across the street and I sat with the engine running for a while. I thought about that first night. The yellow curtains, the cedar quilt, the glass of water on the nightstand. I thought about how I had not asked for any of it and she had given it anyway. I thought about the morning she had taken me to register for school and she had squeezed my hand in the parking lot and said, "You're going to be fine, Ivy." I really believed that. I had not believed her then. I had not let myself believe her for a long time. I believe her now. I drove back to Charlotte. I stopped at a diner on the way, sat at the counter, had eggs and coffee and a piece of apple pie that I didn't need but wanted. The woman behind the counter had a laugh like it came from her whole body, and she was arguing good-naturedly with the cook about a basketball game, and it was ordinary in the best possible way. I sat there longer than I needed to. I left a good tip. Here's what I know now that I did not always know. People who leave do not come back because they love you. They come back because they have run out of other options and you appear to have something they need. The fact that they share your blood does not change what they are asking you to do, which is to reward them for abandoning you. It does not make you cold to refuse. It does not make you unforgiving or cruel or broken. It makes you a person who understands what love actually looks like. Because you have seen what it looks like. You have folded it up and kept it at the foot of your bed. I have not spoken to my mother or my stepfather since that phone call. I do not intend to. My name is Ivy. I am 31 years old. I am a CPA in Charlotte, North Carolina. I have a good apartment, a doorman who holds the elevator, and a quilt that smells like cedar. I turned out just fine. I used to think the hardest part was being left. Standing in that parking lot with a warm bottle of Sprite, watching the space where the car had been, understanding something that a 9-year-old shouldn't have to understand. For a long time, I thought that moment was the wound, the thing I would spend the rest of my life recovering from. But I was wrong. The hardest part wasn't being left. The hardest part was learning to trust that being found by the right people was something I deserved. Corrine didn't have to take me in. She had a full life. She had a garden and a cat, and 61 years of her own story already written. But she made room. She didn't make a big production of it. She just put water on the nightstand and showed up to parent-teacher conferences in matching shoes. And over time, I understood that this was what love actually looked like. Not grand gestures, just consistency. Just showing up, again and again, without being asked. That's the thing nobody tells you about growing up the way I did. You spend so many years waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for the person who chose you to eventually unchoose you, that you almost can't receive the good when it's right in front of you. I almost couldn't. It took me years to stop flinching. But here is what I've come to understand about cause and effect, about the way choices ripple outward into time. My mother made a choice in a parking lot in Charlotte when I was 9 years old. That choice had consequences, not punishment handed down from somewhere above, just the natural, logical result of what she did. She removed herself from my life. So she wasn't in my life. She didn't see me study for my CPA exam at a kitchen table at midnight. She didn't see me sign the papers on my apartment. She didn't see any of it. And when she came back as a stranger who wanted something from someone she didn't know. Because that's what she had made us. Strangers. What took me a long time to understand is that her return had nothing to do with me and everything to do with her. People who are genuinely sorry find ways to carry their own weight. They don't show up at your door with a number. $12,000 isn't reconciliation. It's a transaction dressed up in the language of family. I am not cold for recognizing the difference. I am not unforgiving. I am someone who learned from Corrine, from Joelle, from Gerald holding the elevator, that the people who deserve your trust are the ones who earn it slowly without demanding anything in return. Ivy made it, not in spite of what happened to her, but in some complicated way that I'm still working out because of it. Because being left taught her to build, being found by the right person taught her what to build toward. I think about that parking lot sometimes. I think about the 9-year-old standing there with her Sprite, and I want to tell her it doesn't end there. It starts there. And where it ends up, the apartment, the quilt, the doorman who knows how you take your coffee, is something that nobody can take from you. Not even the people who are supposed to give it to you in the first place. You build it yourself, and it holds.